the natural population of fish is much, 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 much smaller. So there's not the abundance that you would think of. That's a whole sustained thing that Fish and Wildlife does as a business, basically, is to keep the fish going there. That's why I totally recommend, and I have broken the hearts of many vegetarians and vegans, and I'm like, meat and animal products are far, far easier to raise, and you'll produce more calories than you will with vegetables. Now, you have to have all things because you need a diversity. But let me give you an example in the 3-part system that I go into in that webinar. Rabbits, 1 buck and 3 breeding does, and you'll produce 75, 85 rabbits a year. That is the meat equivalent of having a cow.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Marjory Wildcraft from the Grow Network with me. The ultimate resource for modern sustainable living. You know, so many things are coming into play right now. We are entering into the spring planting season. You know, we see the destruction of complex systems in terms of food deliveries and inflation running rampant. You know, one thing we'll need to do first is grow our own food. So Marjory, I appreciate you joining me, and I know we're going to have a lot to talk about. So, floor is yours. What? You know, like you reinvented fire or something.
That is the saving grace of this whole thing. Like, you can grow your own food. You don't need a military, industrial, governmental, commercial complex to feed you, right? You can still use your hands in a backyard or a small space and produce food. You can do it, right? It actually, that's what we did for all of, whenever, history, right? Or if we didn't forage it or hunt it, and all of those people didn't have Google. They didn't have the internet. Most of them couldn't read and write. This is not rocket science. Yeah, it's definitely a new skill you're going to have to learn. But it's totally doable.
Think about also, you just mentioned hunting. Accounts of the Great Depression also was there were 5 times less people on the planet at that time, yet the entire forest was completely hunted out. Now, you have to realize the vastness of the forest and the vastness of nature comparatively to today. And if you're telling me that the entire woods was hunted out, of even sparrows and chipmunks were gone during the Great Depression, yep, and the population was 5 times less, and they were much more cohesive in terms of, people living in a nation that were more willing to help each other at that point than we are today, being so divided. You start to look at that and you think hunting's really not going to be an option, except for the very, very, very beginning. If you have your own land, that where your, game is, and if you could harvest some of that, if you don't get it, it's going to go off in other people's land and it's going to get taken. So your option for hunting will be a short-lived window, in my opinion, in the beginning of a breakdown phase. But after that, it's going to be everybody out there looking for the food, and just food for thought, really. On it's not going to be as easy as you think it is to just go keep your protein intake coming. And I think, Marjorie, maybe you could tell me if you think about this. Like, growing vegetables is going to be orders of magnitude easier than procuring a protein source. But I know you had a whole segment there on rabbits, and walk us through the meat, because this is one thing I do get. Well, where are we going to get our meats from if there's very little cattle, and there's not so much, if you don't have your own pig and the chickens will get poached or whatever? Like, how do we get our meat source?
Yeah, and I'll go right back to what you were talking about, the Great Depression. I was spending a lot of time in the Ozarks at one point in time. I've traveled all over the U.S. looking at different, like, where is the best place to survive through a major collapse. And the Ozarks are great. And I was talking to them about the history there, and they said, yeah, there were no deer in the Ozarks at all for quite a few decades after the Great Depression. And in fact, they had to reintroduce deer and I believe it's elk that they reintroduced into the Ozarks. And it was a huge deal. Now, of course, the place is run over with deer, but those will disappear. I also was like, okay, well, fishing was amazing, right? You go out there and you put out the piece of corn on your hook and bam, the tasty snack of doom, you'd have your fish on there from, and that turned out to be, it's a whole industry. They raise the fingerlings and they release them into the lakes and the streams. But there's not a natural population. I mean, the natural population of fish is much, 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 much smaller. So there's not the abundance that you would think of. That's a whole sustained thing that Fish and Wildlife does as a business, basically, is to keep the fish going there. That's why I totally recommend. And I have broken the hearts of many vegetarians and vegans. And I'm like, meat and animal products are far, far easier to raise, and you'll produce more calories than you will with vegetables. Now, you have to have all things because you need a diversity. But let me give you an example in the 3-part system that I go into in that webinar. Rabbits, 1 buck and 3 breeding does, and you'll produce 75, 85 rabbits a year. That is the meat equivalent of having a cow, but it comes to you in a nice size chunk that you can actually process. I promise you, processing a cow is like a multifamily job over a weekend. So you don't want to deal with large animals.
I've been there.
Yes. Yeah. It's a lot of hard work. And the reason they did it in the fall is you need cool weather so that the meat doesn't deteriorate. Anyway, rabbits, incredible. There's you can produce for a family, the protein requirements for a family of 4 with 1 buck and 3 breeding does, and you can have that the cages and the tractors and the things that you need in the size of a space of an average parking lot. So this is totally possible. And what you'll generate from that, I'll assume 75 rabbits you create because I like to always be more conservative. That's 230,000 calories in a year, which, if you think of a half for a person, one person is going to be 365,000 calories. A 2,000 calorie a day diet, 365 days a year, 365,000, 234,000 calories from the 75 rabbits is huge, right? And consider that with eggs, 1 chicken. I'm sorry, a flock of backyard chickens. Let's say you have 6 laying hens. An average laying hen is going to do about 250 eggs a year. They do need some time off to molt, or if it gets extreme in temperatures, they don't lay. 250 eggs a year, 6 hens, that's 1,500 eggs a year. So that's 3 egg omelets for breakfast for the rest of your life. You don't have to do as the Wall Street suggests and skip breakfast. Plus you'll have like 33 dozen eggs to barter, trade, give away, whatever. 6 laying hens. And again, a chicken coop and run can be built and put in the size of a parking spot. An average size egg, I believe, is 64 calories. I'll have to look that number up, but the total number for the 6 laying hens, 1,500 eggs, is about 94,000 calories. So now compare that with a garden bed. Let's say the 100 square foot vegetable garden bed, which will provide most of the produce that you need. You think about vegetables, right? Is there any fat in vegetables? No, there's no
Nuts,
fat.
maybe, but not veggies.
There's not. And yes, there's some plants with protein. So you're talking about your beans or your legumes, but by and large, your vegetable patch is for your nutrition and your fiber and your carbohydrates. There's not a lot of calories in fiber and nutrition and carbohydrates. I mean, carbohydrates have some, but really, 100 square foot garden bed, we're talking about, I don't know, maybe 50,000 calories in 2 growing seasons. So there's really, green beans, there's just not a lot of calories in it, right? And we're talking about living off of this. You need calories. I know calories has been a bad word, right? Low calorie has been the theme for the past decades, but the calorie will be the next unit of currency. It's coming very, very soon. So animal products by far, also they're easier to take care of once you get the system set up. They're just less time, honestly. So I show people a very simple way to build an off-grid watering system that just works with off of, like float valves, and it doesn't require electricity or anything. It's just a gravity-fed thing. And there's going to be plenty of float valves in the back of every single toilet tank in the world. So there's these supplies are available to anybody anywhere. It's very simple and easy to construct. So animals are definitely the more viable food source. People have said, well, why don't you raise chickens for meat? And that's a very important distinction on that. And we used to, for my family, we'd get 100 baby chicks every year and raise them up. And then, it's like a 3-month project. You raise them up, you feed them, and then you process them over a couple of weekends and put them in the freezer. And then, the family's got chicken for the year and enough other chickens we can give away. The key distinction is why you won't be raising chickens primarily for meat is chickens are omnivores and rabbits are herbivores. And it's much, much easier to feed an herbivore. So your rabbits will love your grass. They'll love your tree trimmings. They'll even eat the bark off of, your fruit trees when you're pruning them. They eat stuff we don't eat, and they turn it into protein and fat. Chickens really like the stuff that we eat, and they tend to compete with us. Like, most chicken feed is some form of grain, right? Which, in the future, if you have any grain, you're not going to feed that to a chicken. You're going to eat it. All right. So raising chickens for meat is actually hugely expensive when you think of in terms of the inputs. Right now, chicken feed's not that expensive, but here very soon, chicken feed is going to be very, very expensive. So that's why herbivores are a much better meat source. Pigs and chickens are herbivores, and and historically, that was a very, having a chicken was a big deal because you just didn't eat that much of it. Having pork was a big deal because you just didn't eat much of it because those animals are much more expensive to raise. People ate beef, they eat sheep, they eat, rabbit. They hunted squirrels. All the herbivores were the primary meat sources.
Yeah, and I can attest to that too, because in the beginning, when we were putting our chicken run and chicken coop out there, we had these 1 square foot concrete blocks that we had on the back of a pallet to try to raise one of the laying boxes up to make it even. But when we moved it to a different place and we lifted up the blocks, there were kind of worms and slugs and stuff under there. Oh, the chickens had a field day. It was like a gourmet delicacy, 5-star restaurant for them. They all jumped on the square. So now what we do is we just take those 2 1 foot by 1 foot square blocks and we just rotate them around. And then we move them about every 10 days or so. And then there's always something under them that's yummy for a chicken. And we just kind of move those around, and an area where we want to smother something, we'll put it over there. If there's some kind of privet, which is an invasive growing here, we'll try to cover up the privet to smother it. But then at the same time, and things will get in there. And what about raising quail?
Yes.
A couple of our neighbors were talking about raising quail, and they can it's almost like a filing card cabinet system that they had of all the quail eggs and all these things here.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I'm just about to shoot a video. I helped set up a friend. I had done a bunch of stuff with quail a few years ago, and we're getting so many requests from people for apartment and condo. What do? I live in an apartment condo. I'm like, yes, there's a lot you can do. Yeah. Would it be better if you could move somewhere and have some land? Absolutely. And should you move out of the urban environment as soon as possible? Yes, you should. But there are people that can't, obviously. And quail are awesome. So I just actually set up a friend with some quail in her home. And we're going to shoot a video on it. She's got 8 quail. We've got this cage that's been built for her. And she's getting 8 eggs a day out of the quail. And it's working great. When the quail get old, then you do have a bit of meat. And 8 quail eggs is probably the equivalent of 2 chicken eggs, which for her is it's a good amount of protein and fat. It's a whole complete food, right? If you think about it, an egg from that slimy mass of yolk and white turns a whole complete bird with lungs and heart and eyes and feet and wings. Everything in that egg is there to create all the nutrition and macronutrients is in that egg to make a complete bird, as well as the chi, the vital life energy. Eggs are a superfood. You know, I don't know why they got such a bad rep for cholesterol in the past, but they are a superfood. And yeah, so quails are great, and you can do it in an apartment or a condominium. And yeah, you know, they don't really smell. You've got to keep up with it, but the smell is minimal. They actually just make kind of like nice sounds. People go, hey, what am I going to do? I've got an HOA and they're down on chickens. I'm like, well, are they down on chickens or are they down on poultry? Because, you know, look at the wording of it, because you could have quail or possibly ducks and get around HOA regulations. Or the other thing is just do it. Don't have a rooster and give the president of the HOA dozens of eggs on a regular basis, you know, like, yeah. But anyway, quail are a great solution for indoor growing. They're fantastic. So it works, and you can get a significant amount of food out of them.
Free America, freest country in the world, but you can't have a chicken in your backyard. I love that. I might have a t-shirt printed up that says quail are awesome. That's going to be it.
Do you remember when we used to have the saying, it's a free country? Right? Where did that saying go? You know, you used to always say, well, it's a free country. You know, somebody would do something. You go, well, it's a free country. And now we don't, nobody says that anymore. What happened to that phrase? You know?
Hey, now I wrote down, I was watching this video just before you and I came on. I got up earlier this morning around 5:30, 5:45. And I watched this this video called Food Banks Buckling, What to Do Now.
Oh,
so a lot of people are getting their assistance off of food banks, and truly food banks, if you don't have the food and it's getting more expensive, a lot of people are holding on to that. So, I mean, where are other sources around the community that you think people would be able to find foods, procure foods? You know, I know you had a segment on, you know, working in a community garden to get some of the produce out of there in the harvest time, et cetera. But like, if people are really out of options and they do rely on food assistance, and the SNAP program is going to reduce the EBT cards next month, I've been reading.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, where are there like little secret spots where people can find food in a city somewhere?
So that's a big reason we have foraging as a really important component of what's available at the Grow Network. Every year I travel a lot. I'm in Austin or California, and I love to be there around August, September, October. Acorns, an incredible food source, very easy to process, deeply nutritious. There were a lot of Native American tribes that was their main caloric source, was acorns. In the Southwest, you've got mesquite beans. Now, it's hard to eat a whole mesquite bean, right? And they need a little more processing, and they have a strong taste, but you begin to incorporate that more and more into your food source. You know, learning how to forage. There's people right now, you go outside and it's a wall of green. You're like, what the hell? But you can learn to identify plants. There's lots and lots of plants out there, and there's lots and lots of food that just gets wasted. You know, people like, oh, I don't want that tree in my yard because it drops stuff on my driveway and makes my driveway stained or whatever, you know. That whole attitude is going to change. But there are ways to forage. There are also farmers always need help. You know, if there's a local organic farmer, say, look, you know, and there's a lot of farmers that have this set up. I've done it before just to experience it. You know, come work for a half a day and I'll give you a bag of vegetables, you know. There's all kinds of work trade type relationships there. There's another group, and I haven't visited their website in a while. It's called sharedearth.com. And I think there are a few other websites out there that do this, where somebody may have a backyard that they're not using, and they try to hook it up with people who do want to grow food in it. Then there's just good old fashioned guerrilla gardening. I did that when I first moved here to Puerto Rico. I didn't have anywhere to grow. I was living in a place that was completely shaded, and the landlord wasn't open to me growing anything. So I just found a public strip of land and just started digging it up and growing squashes and tomatoes and stuff, you know, beans. It's called guerrilla gardening. And a really funny story of that is, while I was out there, I was noticing that, first of all, I saw this bucket that was like kind of a crappy old bucket, but it had a brand new rope tied to it. And I thought, dang, somebody threw out a piece of garbage here in this beautiful thing. And then I thought, no, wait a minute, that rope there indicates it's not a piece of garbage, because it was a ratty old bucket, you know. And then I started noticing that there had been trees planted very intentionally out there, different types of food trees, different palm trees, cacao, that we have a sea almond here. And I was like, oh my God, they're using that bucket to irrigate these trees somebody was guerrilla food forest gardening out there. And it turned out to be my next door neighbor when I finally found out who it was. So funny. We've been best friends ever since. But he's just saying, here's this public land. I'm just going to start planting fruit and nut trees on it. That's a little bit of a longer term thing because we're in a crisis that's going to unfold here in the next couple of months, and fruit trees usually don't produce for a few years. But even the strip of land between the sidewalk and the street, wherever you can, that's not the best because you're going to have car fumes on it, but having food is better than no food.
Yeah, let me ask you a question. You mentioned the trees, fruit trees. So let's say that had grown there for a year or two and the city was going to come in and say, all right, we're going to pave this. So let's say the fruit tree was growing for 2 years and you wanted to retransplant it somewhere else because, it's going to have a root ball. It's going to be, I don't know, a couple 4 feet tall, something, and you don't want to just let it go to waste. Like, what is the possibility of success of retransplanting trees that you might find in a different location and bringing them to a different, more, easier area to keep them well watered, well fertilized, etc. Like retransplanting these types of 2-year-old trees. How does that work?
Yeah, that works. And you can do that. And we do that all the time with little seedlings we see from wild trees that are producing something that we like, and we move them or replant them elsewhere. And you can, they actually, even in Texas, they had these beautiful pecan trees that were like 20 years old. And believe it or not, they had the equipment to like completely dig up the root ball for this and move these 20-year-old trees somewhere else, which is kind of insane. In general, the younger the tree, the better it's going to do. And there have been studies like between a 3-year-old fruit tree that they moved with the root ball, planting it, and then right next to it, planting it a much smaller, like 1-year-old seedling. And in the 5, 6, and 7-year time frame, the 1-year-old seedling actually did outperform like the 2 or 3-year-old tree. But it can be done. It can be done. And if that's what you got, do it. I always say make the best use of what you got.
What would the success rate be on that? You're going to be burning calories to try to get some sort of output. So like the success rate of replanting trees, is 50%, 70%, higher, lower?
There's so many variables in that. In general, with agriculture, you want to overdo everything by at least a factor of 2 or 3. Every year when I'm creating my growing my seedlings for my garden, I always have at least double or triple the amount of start plants that I need. And if my starts work out great, and then I have these others that I can give away, right? But usually something happens, a late freeze, or 1 year my ducks sat on my tomatoes. I mean, there's all kinds, as bizarre things happen. So sometimes it's all bizarre things that you just never could know. Maybe you planted it in a hole and you didn't know just underneath that spot was this gigantic rock, and that thing has to spend years now trying to get its roots around it or something. You know what I mean? There's all kinds of things that can happen, right?
Overplanting, yeah, that's a good idea, because you don't want to just do the exact amount and then lose it, because I'm telling you one thing absolutely for sure, the freezes are continuing to be later and later into the spring, because I can attest to that, because over the last 2 years when our blossoms would come out, we'd get a freeze and then we get zero fruit because everything got frozen that was out there. And it keeps happening later. 1 year it was in late March, and then, it was in early April last year. A lot of stuff had already bloomed out. It had been 70 degrees for days and days and days and weeks and everything down here in Tennessee. And then suddenly one rare freeze event comes in, whoosh, goes down to 28 degrees and back up to 70 another day and a half later. But all those blossoms that are out there gone, and they just don't come back. It's not like they're going to be, hey, let's get a second chance. So you get once in a year. And I don't know, the weather systems seem to be getting more and more mixed up, and the seasons seem to be shifting. There's an earlier onset of cold in a lot of places, not everywhere, but many, where they get early blizzards. But then the outset or coming out of winter into spring, then you get that last 1 or 2 deep freezes. Just I don't know, look through different chapters of history. How would people cope with that? Because not everybody can have a greenhouse.
When we're dealing with such a variable climate, because there's, many more of the reasons for why the climate is so weird and erratic, the real key is to have diversity. I'll never forget going to the Permaculture Institute, which is just north of Santa Fe, with Scott and Arena Pittman. And I had been there. They had primarily had this amazing old growth food forest that they had been growing for like 30 or 40 years with an acequia water irrigation system. That and animals was their main food source. And then I was visiting them in the spring. And what had happened is last fall, there had been a really, really freaky, like out of nowhere, 10 degrees below zero freeze that set back every single fruit tree in the region, and anything more, less than an inch in diameter, or maybe even 2 inches in diameter on trees died off. And fortunately, they had mature trees that still had main trunks and main branches, but they knew that food production from those old trees was going to be not happening for at least a year or 2 years while those trees regrouped and recovered. The same thing just happened to a community in Colorado that I had lived in, where they had that same early on freak freeze that wiped out just huge amounts of fruit production for 2 years in the valley. Well, anyway, going back to Scott and Arena, they were like, yeah, the animals made it because we knew, and we kept them warm. And there they were digging up an annual garden. They said, yeah, we hadn't done annuals before, but we get it. You got to have resiliency, and you can get food producing in an annual garden pretty quickly because their perennials were all going to be set back or died. So diversity is the key.
That's a huge wake-up statement to say somebody with 40 years of gardening experience got hammered that they had to like pivot on the way that they also produce food. That's a huge, huge statement there, that we're in an ever-changing environment, and one size or one plan will definitely not fit. You're going to need redundancy after redundancy after redundancy.
Yeah, they're permaculturists. And for a long time, the permaculture story was, let's go into perennials and animals because they're simple. They are easier. Right. And and then one leg of that got knocked out, and they're like, okay, we're going to go to annuals. We're going to make this happen. We're going to do a garden. Foraging is also another thing that's real. There's a lot of calories that are out there. Wildcrafting. And I mean, I always believe when you keep your mind clear and open, and you open your heart and you say, look, almost every question I've ever had, if I open my heart and I ask it sincerely, the universe brings me an answer, right? If you can really keep an open mind. And I really have always had that as a guiding principle. And I really recommend to people, like, if you're in a situation that you think is impossible, open up your mind and your heart and you say, look, I need a solution to this, and just be open to all kinds of crazy possibilities. It will come to you. I really believe that. I don't believe that we're alone on this planet. You have tremendous resources from other realms that are here to help you.
And that's something that is way outside human control. That's the ultimate amount of power there. So if you understand that is always at your fingertips to help you move through these changes and this transition of society we're about to see, there's just all these things interlooped and interplay. And why are governments behaving the way they are today? Well, if you understand the cyclic nature of things, it makes much more sense we've already delved and we're a couple steps way deep into the news cycle. We're not beginning, we're not waiting for it to begin. It's already begun. And you can see, probably 4 years ago, the awareness of those that have better sensory technologies and satellites, et cetera, that can measure the changes are like, all right, we got to push our plan now because we're way into the cycle. But for us on the periphery out here looking at it, seeing all these other signs, it's going to be a continuous change from year to year, because what works one year probably or may not work the next year. So it'll be a combination of, it's going to be a hybrid, I guess, is the best way to put it. So I'm super stoked that you put the webinar out and all the information that's in there, because if you're starting from scratch, or even if you've already been doing it for such a long time, there's something else in there too for everybody. It's just and then coming into the forum, I mean, once you get in there, you're not coming back out for weeks.
It's fun. It's fun. I get such a great group of people. By the way, when they sign up for that webinar, I mean, I've really designed.
I'll put the link in the description box below so we can go click and go right to that.
By the way, when you go there, I'll email you like the best ebook we have on the 50 free fertilizers and how to make that off-grid waterer. I think we have another video on there on how to, source a bunch of chicken feed for free. And there's a couple of other resources that we send you, like our top, ebooks of all time from the Grow Network for people who are interested in basically survival food production. So, it's more and more. I had heard this would happen before, that we're all going to have to make a decision of what side we're on, and more and more that's just becoming abundantly clear to me. And I had always known that I was here to serve those who wanted to get through this time frame, and that's what the Grow Network is all about. So there feels like there's a real coming together of people who understand what's going on and helping each other and working with each other. And I'm really super stoked, because we do have the power of the internet and connectivity to be able to communicate and learn. And we're humans. We learn quickly and we disseminate information rapidly. And if nothing else, we are very, very good at adapting to change. We may not like it, but we can do it.
Yeah, stay on the side of light and keep that in. And that's really the best statement that could be made is, we've always made it. You have to think about the last 12,000 years of cataclysms, that what we're about to experience would be, I don't know exactly what type of we're moving through, but in comparison to being wiped back to about 10 million humans on the planet and restarting, yeah, I think it's going to be a lighter version of that and far less to overcome.
Yeah.
But you have to realize that's how far back we came after the Younger Dryas impact, fully populating world at that point, prior, as we exited out of the ice age. And then suddenly we get this cometary impact on the ice sheet and wipes humanity back literally to less or around 10 million. That's it. And we came back in the last 12,000 years after cataclysmic coolings at around 8,200 years ago, that again, as population increased from that point, boom, right back down again, because the climate changed so drastically, so quickly, that they weren't able to grow food for approximately 15 years. And then, these massive eruptions through history, and just the 535 set of eruptions that set humanity back as well. We've been through a lot as humanity, as a human race. I mean, we can definitely get through this. And that's the message that I hope we can put out there. Never give up hope. Please stay with us on this. We can get through this. We can, really.